At my sister's wedding, she humiliated me in front of everyone, saying she still lives in a studio apartment with roaches. My aunt yelled she brought that weird homemade dish again. Hours later, the catering team refused to serve, and everyone begged for my recipe. What happened next was. There's a strange silence that comes after public humiliation, like the moment after a loud crash when the world holds its breath. That's exactly what it felt like when my sister Celeste made me the punchline of her toast. She stood there in her designer gown, with her carefully practiced laugh, and mocked the life I had carved out for myself. A studio apartment. Roaches. A failed relationship. The whole room chuckled along with her like it was a well-rehearsed comedy routine, and I was just a character in it. I didn't storm out. I didn't cry in the bathroom. I simply lifted my glass and played along with the grace I've learned to wear like armor. But inside? I was on fire. Not the kind that burns everything down, but the slow, determined burn that heats up a plan without anyone noticing. The next morning, the sun rose over Cape May like nothing had happened. The sky was pastel blue, the ocean glistened outside the venue, and the air was heavy with sea salt and expensive perfume. Everyone else moved through the preparations like it was the most important day of the year. I stayed out of the way. I wasn't asked to help with anything, not even hair and makeup. I sat with a book by the window in my room at the inn while bridesmaids ran around like bees in a hive. The room next to mine buzzed with laughter and the occasional shriek from Celeste. From what I heard, her dress didn't fit quite right anymore. The seamstress had done her best to fix it, but it still dug in around the ribs. I shouldn't have felt satisfaction over that, but I did. By the afternoon, guests had started to arrive. Men in tailored suits, women in satin and lace, high heels clacking against the cobblestone walkways outside the venue. I put on a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, but flattering, and brought my cooler down to the kitchen entrance like I had planned all along. It was a habit, really. I always travel with ingredients. You never know when someone's going to want just a little something for later. The catering crew had pulled in around noon. A black van with silver lettering. You could tell they were high-end clipboard-carrying, earpiece-wearing professionals. They moved like a well-oiled machine. Until about 2 hours later, when I heard the first hint of trouble. The head chef, a tall man with a thick Boston accent, was pacing in the hallway on his phone. He was fidgeting, muttering words I couldn't catch. Then his voice went sharp. "You're telling me the whole prep kitchen's compromised? Salmonella? Are you serious?" That got my attention. I leaned in slightly from around the corner. Another staff member was biting her lip and clutching her clipboard like a life vest. "So what do we do?" she asked. The chef shook his head. "We're not allowed to serve anything. We're on hold until the health inspector clears us. That could be hours. Maybe not even today." It was like watching the first domino fall. Panic started to ripple across the staff. Phones came out. Calls were made. And soon, the wedding planner was informed. That's when all hell broke loose. The planner, a woman named Laurel with tight curls and tighter control issues, nearly dropped her headset. "There are 200 people coming to this reception," she said, clutching the front of her blazer. "You can't just not serve dinner." The chef didn't even flinch. "Unless you want to be responsible for sending Grandma Joan to the ER, I'd suggest you don't serve anything that came out of our kitchen last night." Celeste was pulled aside next. I watched from a distance, sitting near a stone bench by the gardens. She had that panicked, high-pitched tone that she always got when things weren't going her way. "What do you mean we have no dinner? You're supposed to handle this." Laurel was trying to calm her down, but Celeste wasn't having it. "My fiancé's parents are flying in from Switzerland. You want to tell them all we're serving is spinach puffs and mini crab cakes?" It was almost theatrical. And then, out of nowhere, Aunt Bernice appeared at my side. She was wearing a lavender dress with sequins and far too much perfume. "Maribel," she said, like she had just discovered my existence. "You made that pasta thing last night, didn't you?" I blinked at her. Yeah. Well. She looked around like she was checking to see if anyone else would offer a better idea. People loved it. Like, went back for seconds and everything. You think you could, whip something up? For dinner? I raised my eyebrows. You want me to cook for the wedding? She gave a tight smile. Well, you are already here. Moments later, Laurel was at my side. Then Celeste. Her tone had changed from biting to desperate. I mean, it's not like we have any other options, she muttered, not quite able to say the word please. I looked at her for a long moment. It would have been so easy to say no. To let the whole thing collapse. Let the glittering tower of her wedding fantasy crumble under its own weight. But that's not who I am. Where's the backup kitchen? I asked. And that's when everything began to shift. The kitchen wasn't glamorous. It was technically a backup space used by the catering staff to reheat dishes or prep last-minute items. But it had a gas range, working ovens, and most importantly counter space. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and stale bread. There were a few utensils scattered around, and some stainless steel pans stacked under the sink. Nothing fancy. But to me, it was a blank canvas. I opened my cooler and laid out what I had: a bag of rigatoni, 2 blocks of mozzarella, shredded Parmesan, a jar of the marinara sauce I made from scratch every Sunday, a bundle of fresh basil from my little windowsill garden, a half-dozen garlic cloves, and some ground beef I'd picked up on a whim. Maybe I knew. Maybe a part of me was always preparing for the moment I'd be needed. Or maybe I just didn't trust Celeste's fancy catering plan. Laurel hovered behind me like she wanted to micromanage, but once she saw me take charge chopping garlic with speed, boiling pasta water with purpose, she wisely stepped back and started making calls to round up extra hands. An hour in, I had 2 junior catering staff following my instructions. Neither had cooked anything beyond a heat-and-serve dish in their lives. But they were willing to learn. I had them slicing bread, prepping salad, and layering trays of baked pasta like it was an assembly line. Outside, I could hear the ceremony starting. The murmur of seated guests, the hum of a string quartet. Celeste was walking down the aisle in a $12,000 gown while I was elbow-deep in ricotta, sweat dotting my forehead and hair pinned up with a ballpoint pen. I wasn't bitter. I was focused. As I stirred the sauce, I thought about all the times I'd cooked to prove something. To get someone's attention. To earn love or respect, or at least a thank you. And yet, those things rarely came. My mother never complimented my cooking, just made jokes about how it wasn't the way her mother did it. Celeste treated it like a quirky hobby. Something small people did with their time. Something people without mortgages or marriages or real lives did. But now? Now, people are depending on it. Not because they cared about me, but because I was the only one who could fix the mess they had created. The sauce simmered. The scent of roasted garlic and tomato filled the kitchen. I layered the first tray of pasta, sauce, cheese, and repeat until it was ready to go into the oven. Then another. And another. We got 8 trays in total, plus a giant bowl of salad and garlic bread I toasted with olive oil and whatever seasoning I could scavenge. I had just set the last tray in when someone came in, panting and breathless. Hi, you're Maribel, right? It was one of Malcolm's cousins. People are asking about the food. They're saying the kitchen smells amazing. Like, really amazing. I gave her a tight smile. Tell them it'll be ready in 45. By the time the reception started, I was exhausted but riding a strange high. The waitstaff began carrying trays out to the buffet area. Guests, unaware of the drama behind the scenes, were already starting to crowd near the food station. I stepped out just long enough to see people grabbing plates, sniffing the air, asking what this was. It's not on the menu, I heard someone say. But it smells incredible. The DJ was setting up. Celeste and Malcolm had just entered to cheers and clapping. She was beaming again like everything had gone off without a hitch. And then she saw the buffet. Her smile faltered for just a second. Just long enough for me to notice. She wasn't mad. Not exactly. But it was like watching someone realize the show had gone on without them as the lead. Aunt Bernice was already at a table with a full plate, digging in like she hadn't eaten in days. "This is better than the lobster they served at Diane's wedding," she told the person next to her. "Who made this?" I walked past her quietly. Bernice looked up mid-bite and paused. "You?" I nodded. She looked down at her plate, then back at me. "Well, it's very good." A compliment. Not exactly heartfelt. But from Bernice? Practically a standing ovation. I returned to the kitchen just in time to pull out the last tray. Laurel popped her head in a few minutes later. "People are raving," she said, looking genuinely stunned. "I've never seen a crowd react like this to pasta at a black tie event." She handed me a glass of water and sat down on an upside-down crate. "You saved this wedding." I laughed. "Let's not get dramatic." "No," she said seriously. "Really. If this had tanked, I'd be out of work next month." We sat there for a second in silence. I hadn't felt this calm in months. The reception was still going on. Toasts were being made. A band had started playing Sinatra. But I stayed where I was, in the kitchen, cooling off with a bite of leftover bread and the smell of triumph lingering in the air. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. Not for my failures or my flaws or my modest apartment. But for what I could actually do. For who I really was. The music shifted from swing to soft pop covers. Through the back hallway, I could hear laughter and glass clinking, a blend of celebration and relief. The catastrophe had been averted, and everyone except perhaps the bride herself was enjoying themselves. I was content to stay in the kitchen. I'm not a spotlight person. Never have been. But one of the younger servers, a wiry guy with nervous energy, peeked in and said, "I think they want you out there. People keep asking who made the food." I wiped my hands on a towel. "They can eat without knowing." He hesitated. "Your sister asked for you." That stopped me. I looked down at my shoes, now dusted with flour, and then at my reflection in the oven door messy bun, tomato sauce splatter on the collar, eyes tired but alive. I walked out through the side corridor that led to the reception hall. Lights strung across the ceiling glowed warm against the ivory linens. People were laughing, eating, leaning back in their chairs with the kind of satisfaction only comfort food can bring. There was none of the stuffy restraint of a high-end meal. Just full plates and fuller conversations. I saw Celeste standing near the cake table. She was alone, sipping from a half-empty champagne flute. Her expression was unreadable. I approached cautiously, not quite sure what to expect. When she saw me, her eyes flicked down to my apron and back up again. Her face was blank, but not cruel. That was new. "Everyone's asking about the food," she said. Her tone was careful. Measured. "I keep hearing. It was better than what we originally planned." I said nothing. She took another sip, then let out a short laugh, not mocking this time. Just hollow. "You always were good at that. Cooking. Making things out of nothing." I guess I didn't really. I don't know. I didn't expect it to save my wedding. I folded my arms. "You didn't expect to need saving." She didn't argue. A breeze drifted through the open balcony doors. Outside, the ocean stretched into the horizon, and the sky had turned that muted blue-gray that only comes right before night. "I'm not going to pretend what I said last night wasn't awful," she finally said. "It was. And I'm sorry." That surprised me. Celeste never apologized. Not even as a kid. She once blamed me for breaking a vase that she threw at me. And our mother believed her. But this time, she was looking me in the eye. And though there was still some pride left in her posture, it wasn't the kind that needed to tower over me anymore. I nodded once. I didn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way she wanted. But I acknowledged it. She looked like she wanted to say more, but Malcolm walked over then. He smiled, holding out a plate with a second helping of ziti. "This is insane," he said with a full mouth. "Seriously? Where did you learn to cook like this?" I shrugged. "You learn when it's just you and a hot plate and a fifth-floor walk-up with a broken fire alarm." He laughed, not unkindly. "Have you ever thought about doing this full-time? Cooking? Yeah. You could start a business. Wedding rescue services. In case of caterer failure, call Maribel." Celeste gave him a look, but he didn't catch it. He was already walking away. I stood beside her for another few moments. She glanced sideways at me. "Would you have done it? If I hadn't asked?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know. There was a version of me that would have walked away just to let her fall. To let her feel the weight of her own pettiness. But there was also the version that showed up. That cooked. That fed the people who laughed at her jokes the night before. The version who always hoped to be seen for what she really offered. "I don't think I did it for you," I finally said. "I think I did it for myself." She nodded. For once, she didn't try to twist my words. Someone called her name from the stage. One of the groomsmen wanted to give a toast. She straightened her shoulders and started to walk away, then paused and turned back. "Just. Thank you." She said it softly, like she didn't want anyone else to hear. And then she was gone again, smiling for the crowd like nothing had ever gone wrong. I stood there for a moment, feeling strange. Not victorious. Not vindicated. But grounded. Laurel came up next, clipboard in hand, her headset now hanging around her neck. "I had no idea you could pull off something like that. Honestly? If I didn't know better, I'd think you were the caterer." "I just did what I do best." She looked thoughtful. "I might have some events coming up. Smaller weddings. Backyard things. If you're interested." I raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. You've got something here, Maribel. People don't want frilly food. They want something that makes them feel like they're being taken care of." And just like that, the seed of an idea planted itself in my mind. A business, maybe. Something small. Something real. Something of mine. But that was a thought for another day. That night, I stayed until the very last tray came back empty. I stacked the pans, thanked the young staff who helped me, and quietly packed up my cooler. No one made a big speech. No one handed me flowers. But there were whispers. Who made the food? That pasta was unbelievable. Way better than what I was expecting. As I walked through the parking lot under the string lights, my shoes clicking softly against the pavement, I realized something. I came here thinking I was an outsider. The forgotten sister. The plus one to my own bloodline. But I was the only reason this wedding hadn't turned into a disaster. And somewhere between the garlic bread and the second tray of ziti, people saw me for who I was, not Celeste's weird older sister from Queens, not the one with the studio and the quirky food thing. Just Maribel. Capable. Steady. And finally, in control of her own story. The wedding ended just after midnight. By then, I was back in my room at the inn, my cooler tucked neatly in the corner, my dress hung over the back of the chair to air out the scent of garlic and balsamic vinegar. I didn't join the after party at the hotel bar. I didn't want to make small talk with people who had laughed at me just 24 hours ago. I sat by the open window, legs curled under me, sipping lukewarm tea and listening to the ocean push up against the rocks. I should have felt triumphant, I guess. Everyone had eaten my food. The wedding had been saved. I'd even gotten a soft, awkward apology from Celeste. But what I felt wasn't quite victory. It was more like stillness. Like something had shifted just enough for me to notice. A quiet power humming under the surface. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. That was the real win. The next morning, I checked out early. The lobby was empty except for a single front desk clerk who offered me a complimentary coffee and a perfunctory thank you for staying with us. As I loaded the last of my things into the trunk of my car, I heard a voice behind me. Heading out already? I turned. It was Malcolm's mother, Constance. Sharp eyes, silver hair swept into a twist, and a string of pearls that looked like they hadn't come from any department store on earth. Yes, I said, politely. Got a long drive back. She walked toward me, her heels clicking softly on the concrete. I didn't get to try your tiramisu last night. It was gone before I could get a plate. That's usually a good sign. She gave a small, dry chuckle. I suppose it is. She paused, then lowered her voice slightly. You know, Celeste is lucky. Not just to have married Malcolm, but to have someone like you who shows up when it matters. I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. You don't strike me as the sentimental type. She smirked. I'm not. But I do recognize strength when I see it. And with that, she turned and walked away, her coat swaying behind her like a curtain closing on the last scene. I drove the 3.5 hours back to Queens in thoughtful silence. The GPS offered 2 alternate routes and traffic warnings, but I didn't rush. I didn't even turn on music. I just let the quiet stretch, my mind replaying the events of the weekend like clips from a strange, surreal film. When I got home, the studio apartment greeted me like an old friend, cluttered but cozy. My plants needed watering, and the window was slightly ajar, letting in the smell of street food from the corner cart. I kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, still in the clothes from the drive, and just exhaled. Back to reality. Except something was different. That evening, I checked my phone. I had messages. Lots of them. Some from people I didn't even know. A cousin from my father's side who hadn't spoken to me in years sent a simple, "Heard what you did." That's pretty badass. Laurel had followed me on Instagram and sent a DM, "Hey, I might have a couple events coming up that could use your touch. Your game?" Even Malcolm had texted, "Everyone's still talking about that baked ziti. My mom wants the recipe. You okay if I give her your number?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I scrolled back to a note I'd left in my phone months ago, just a name: studio suppers, a business idea I never took seriously. Catering, private dinners, maybe recipe development. It had felt like a fantasy at the time. Too risky. Too expensive. Too many moving parts. But now? Now there were people asking for it before I'd even offered it. The next few days unfolded in a strange blur. I went back to my day job at the food magazine, testing chili recipes for an autumn feature, but my mind kept drifting. I wrote down the exact quantities I used at the wedding. I sketched a rough menu for hypothetical events. I priced aluminum trays, serving gear, even rental kitchens. I researched permits. I had a list by the end of the week. That Friday, I got a call from Laurel. "I've got a rehearsal dinner in Brooklyn next month. Outdoor. 40 people. The couple is super chill, and they want homey, comforting food." I showed them photos of your pasta and bread from the wedding. "They're sold." My throat went dry. "You want me to cater it?" "I want you. Not some company. You. Can you do it?" I said yes before I could think too hard. The next call I made was to the only person I knew who had her life more organized than anyone else I've ever met, my friend Salma, a former chef who had gone corporate. She offered to help with prep and told me to let her know what I needed. "But only if you let me boss you around for the first hour," she joked. The wedding became a footnote, something Celeste posted about on social media with soft filters and vague captions. "What a beautiful weekend with family and friends." She didn't tag me in any photos. Not that I expected her to. But I was no longer orbiting her world. I was building my own. Orders started coming in slowly. One party. Then a baby shower. then an engagement dinner. Word spread through Laurel's network like warm butter on toast. My apartment was too small to work out of for long, so I rented a tiny commercial kitchen space in Sunnyside. Not glamorous, but clean, affordable, and mine from 5 a.m. to 3 p.m., 7 days a week. One night, about a month after the wedding, I got a package in the mail. No note. Just a large, engraved wooden cutting board with Studio Suppers Chef Maribel carved into the corner. It had to be from Celeste. I didn't text to confirm. And she didn't reach out. But I left the board on the counter anyway, right where I prepared all my sauces. By November, the leaves and queens had turned brittle and orange. The scent of roasted chestnuts and burnt pretzels drifted from sidewalk vendors, and the chill in the air meant my tiny studio's radiator finally sputtered back to life. Things had started to feel steady, busy, but good. Studio Suppers was gaining traction faster than I could have anticipated. I wasn't getting rich, but I was booking consistent gigs, enough to scale back my hours at the magazine. I had a rhythm now: market runs in the morning, kitchen prep before noon, deliveries or setups by late afternoon. My body was tired in that satisfying way only purposeful work can create. My hands smelled of garlic more often than not, and my voicemail was regularly full of event inquiries and tasting requests. And then one Wednesday morning, my phone buzzed with a notification that made me stop mid-whisk. New email from celeste.raymond@whitehallpr.com. Subject: Holiday Gala Potential Catering Opportunity. One stared at it for a long time. It had been weeks since we'd spoken, maybe 2 brief texts about a distant cousin's birthday, both of which had fizzled out into silence. There had been no updates, no invitations, no further apologies. Just that cutting board and a kind of mutual retreat. But now this? I opened the email. Hi Maribel, my firm is hosting a holiday gala for clients and media contacts of around 120 guests. We lost our original caterer due to a scheduling conflict, and your name came up, again and again, from a few guests who were at the wedding. Would you be open to discussing a menu for the event? The vibe is elevated comfort food, cozy, wintry, elegant but not pretentious. Pretty much everything you already do. Let me know. And congrats, by the way. Everyone's been talking about Studio Suppers. Celeste. I read it 3 times. It was professional. Polished. Not cold, exactly, but formal, like we were strangers who used to have a last name in common. And congrats? That landed weirdly in my stomach. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit in my inbox while I stirred a pot of butternut squash soup and wondered if I was being tested or just needed. That night, I called Salma. Take it, she said, without hesitation. You're not doing it for her. You're doing it for your business. But it's her event. So what? She doesn't own your time, Maribel. She doesn't get to take credit for what you've built. But if she wants to pay you market rate to help her company look good in front of clients, take the check and double the garlic. I laughed. She was right. I needed to stop viewing Celeste as a personal landmine and start seeing her as just another name in the calendar. So I emailed her back. Hi Celeste, thanks for reaching out. I'd be happy to send over some sample menus and discuss logistics. We're booking into mid-December, so I'd need to confirm the date ASAP. For an event of that size, pricing begins at X, with options for dessert and beverage add-ons. Looking forward to hearing more about the theme and space. Maribel, I didn't say it's nice to hear from you. I didn't ask how she was. I kept it business. And the next morning, I got a reply confirming the date, budget approval, and a request for Maribel's famous Ziti to make a comeback. The irony wasn't lost on me. The event was held at a venue in the Flatiron District, a sleek, high-ceilinged space with exposed brick and matte gold fixtures. It screamed money in that understated way New York professionals loved. Celeste met me at the walkthrough 2 weeks before the event, clipboard in hand, wearing heels that didn't dare touch public transportation. She greeted me with a brisk nod. Thanks for coming. No problem, I said, equally crisp. We talked about menus, service style, and headcounts. She made a couple of suggestions, none of which I took, and I watched her accept that without pushback. That was new. Then, toward the end of the walkthrough, she hesitated. "You're really doing this, huh?" she asked quietly. "Like, this is your life now?" I looked her in the eye. "Yes. It is." She gave a small nod, maybe unsure of what to say next. I didn't offer anything to fill the silence. On the night of the event, I arrived early with my team. Salma was already setting up the chafing dishes while Marcus, our part-time server, polished glasses. We had a roasted chicken with herb gravy, mini mushroom tarts, honey-glazed carrots, and, of course, the baked ziti dressed up with a burrata topping and truffle oil drizzle. Guests arrived in waves, well-dressed and wine-lively. I stayed mostly in the back, as usual. That is, until one of Celeste's colleagues cornered me. "You're the chef?" she asked, eyes bright with recognition. "Celeste said you were her sister, but I didn't realize you were this talented." I offered a polite smile. "It's kind of a recent thing." "No way," she said. "You should have been doing this ages ago." "I mean, this food? This is New York Times quality. Do you have a card?" I handed her one, suddenly aware that the stack I'd brought might not be enough. Later, as the crowd thinned and the wine bottles emptied, I stepped out for air. The street was quiet, the hum of traffic low and distant. Celeste appeared beside me, her coat wrapped tightly around her. "I heard a dozen people ask for your card," she said. I didn't respond. She turned toward me. "I'm not going to pretend we're suddenly close. I know we're not. But I am proud of you." I glanced at her. "That the PR version or the real one?" She smiled faintly. "Both, I guess." It wasn't warm. It wasn't some grand emotional breakthrough. But it was honest. I nodded. "Thanks for the work," I said, my voice level. "I'll send the invoice tomorrow." "You should double your rate," she said. "You're undercharging." And with that, she turned and went back inside. I stayed out there a little longer. The air was sharp, the kind that wakes you up from the inside out. I looked up at the building so tall, so indifferent, and thought about where I was just 6 months ago. Alone in my apartment. Unseen. A punchline at someone else's party. Now? Now I was feeding the people who used to whisper about me. Now I was the one being talked about in kitchens, in client meetings, over candlelit tables. Not as a cautionary tale, but as someone who showed up when it mattered. And who kept showing up, even when no one thought she would. The holidays came fast that year. Between orders, catering prep, and the occasional custom dinner party, I barely had time to acknowledge the season. I skipped the decorative wreaths, ignored the Hallmark marathons, and bought gifts on my phone in line at the produce market. My apartment stayed mostly untouched, save for the small rosemary plant I tied a ribbon around and called a tree. It wasn't that I was lonely. If anything, I felt more present than I had in years. I had Salma. I had my team. I had a calendar that looked more full than frightening. And I had something else unexpected. Stability. But right around the second week of December, I got a text from my mother. "Mom, family dinner. Sunday before Christmas. Celeste is hosting. Everyone's expected. 5 p.m. sharp." That was it. No please, no hope you can come. Just an instruction, as if we were all wind-up dolls that could be ordered to perform on cue. I stared at it for a long time. Celeste was hosting? That was new. Usually, holidays were at my mother's house, a modest place in East Brunswick that hadn't seen a new couch since the Bush administration. I hadn't been back in almost 2 years. I was about to type "I won't be able to make it" when a second text came through. "Celeste, I hope you come." Really? No pressure, just, it would mean something. I blinked. It was the first time in decades she'd asked me for something that wasn't soaked in expectation or pride. And it wasn't even about food. That alone made me pause. I showed Salma the text during our prep shift. "You're going, right?" she asked while rinsing a tray of kale. I shrugged. "I don't know. It's just going to be me sitting there while Aunt Bernice asks why I'm still single and Mom critiques my career through passive-aggressive compliments." Salma smirked. "So, a traditional Christmas, then." She had a point. That Sunday, I made the drive out. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't bring anything but a bottle of wine, still wrapped in the paper bag from the store. I wore a simple black sweater, jeans, and boots that had walked me through dozens of chaotic event setups. When I pulled up to Celeste's house, yes, her house, I was hit by how polished everything looked. She and Malcolm had bought a townhouse in Montclair. Modern, beige stone exterior, trimmed bushes, a wreath that probably cost more than my entire grocery haul last week. I hesitated at the door. The last time I'd seen Celeste in a hostess role was when she threw a 30th birthday party for herself and introduced me as her DIY sister who makes weird Pinterest food. I rang the bell. Malcolm answered. "Maribel." "You came." His surprise was genuine, but warm. He stepped aside and I entered a foyer that smelled faintly of cinnamon and eucalyptus. Celeste appeared from the kitchen, wearing a red sweater dress and a flour smudge on her cheek. She looked human. Less perfect. Real. "Hey," she said, awkwardly. "You made it." Figured I'd stop by before the guilt trip started. She laughed nervously, maybe. But not fake. The dining room was already set. And to my absolute shock, she'd cooked. Real food. Roast chicken, green beans with slivered almonds, mashed sweet potatoes, and some kind of cranberry thing that looked like it had come from a recipe site, not a can. My mother was already seated, glass of Chardonnay in hand, lips pursed. "Well," she said. "Look who finally made it." "Hi, Mom." Aunt Bernice was there too, but unusually quiet. My cousin Haley gave me a slight smile across the table. No one made a comment about my apartment. Or my job. Or even the fact that I hadn't brought anything. Instead, Celeste pulled out a chair beside her. "Sit," she said simply. Dinner was, surprisingly, normal. The food was decent. A little underseasoned, but edible. Conversation stayed in the shallow end: vacation plans, work updates, someone's new dog. Then, about halfway through the meal, Celeste cleared her throat. "I know this isn't what we usually do," she started. "But I wanted to take a minute to say something." My spine straightened. She looked across the table, eyes on our mother, then to me. "I haven't always been the best sister," she said. "Or daughter. I've taken a lot for granted. Especially people." Judith gave a small cough. "Is this about therapy again?" Celeste ignored her. "But I've been learning a lot. About myself. About what matters. And I just want to say to Maribel, I'm sorry. For the way I've treated you. For the wedding. For everything before it. You didn't deserve that." Silence. I felt everyone's eyes shift to me. I didn't cry. I didn't jump up to hug her. I didn't do any of the things that would have made it easier for her. I just nodded. "Thank you," I said. And that was enough. After dinner, as people drifted to the living room, Celeste helped me gather plates. "She asked me to host," she said, scrubbing a dish. "Mom, I mean. Said she didn't feel up for it. First time she's handed it over." I handed her a towel. "You did good. I followed one of your old recipes," she said. "From that food blog you had in 2014. The one you deleted." I blinked. "You remembered that?" She smiled. "I always read your stuff. I just never told you." There it was again. That subtle shift. That closing of the gap between us. We weren't fixed. But maybe, finally, we were trying. And for the first time in my life, I left a family dinner not feeling smaller but whole. 2 weeks after Christmas, I was back in my kitchen in Sunnyside, prepping for a New Year's Eve dinner for a small client in Cobble Hill, 10 people, intimate, nothing extravagant. I was kneading dough for garlic rolls when my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. @Celeste.Raymond tagged you in a post. That stopped me cold. Curious, and with floured fingers, I tapped it open. There she was, Celeste, standing in front of her perfectly set table from Christmas Eve, captioned with something I never thought I'd read. Hosting Christmas dinner this year felt like a big step, and I couldn't have done it without inspiration from the person who knows comfort food better than anyone I've ever met, my sister, at Studio Suppers. Thank you for showing up, even when we didn't deserve it. Thank you for feeding us, in more ways than one. P.S. The cranberry sauce was hers too. Don't let her tell you otherwise. Fork and knife with plate red heart. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't know whether to like it, comment, or just sit with it. I chose to sit with it. A few hours later, while the dough was proofing, I walked out to my fire escape with a mug of tea. The sun was setting behind Manhattan, casting the skyline in gold. The air was cold and sharp in my lungs. I sat there in silence and thought about the last few months. Not long ago, I was a shadow in my own family. A name on a seating chart. The girl with potential, but no presence. Now? Now I have a business. A name people said with respect. Clients who valued me. People who called me chef. Not because of some certificate, but because of what I created, because of what I gave to others without losing myself in the process. I still lived in the same studio. The radiator still clanked. Roaches still visited when the heat got too high. But it felt different now. Not like something to be ashamed of, but something I'd built a life out of. And in the back of my mind, a voice I hadn't heard in a while whispered, "You were never the failure. You were just on your own clock." Sometimes, people see your worth only after they need you. But the real victory is when you no longer need them to. I didn't start this story looking for revenge. But sometimes, the best revenge is simply this: you become unforgettable. Not because you shouted. Not because you stormed out. But because you showed up calm, capable, unshaken. And everyone who once doubted you? They come back for seconds.